So here's a number that should honestly stop you in your tracks. Less than 1%. That's how much of the world's dirty money, the cash from fraud, from trafficking, from organized crime, ever actually gets caught. Out of somewhere between $2 and $5 trillion laundered every single year. And the wild part? It's not that the banks aren't trying. They spend hundreds of billions on compliance. The problem is the design. Every bank watches its own little corner, all alone, while the criminals move as one big network across dozens of banks and borders. So a group of the world's central banks asked a really simple question. What if the banks could work together and let an AI hunt the whole network at once? They called it Project Aurora. And what they found? It might just change how the entire financial system fights crime. Okay, so let's set the scene, because the scale here is almost hard to believe. The Bank for International Settlements, and the easiest way to think of them is as the central bank for central banks. They put the figure at 2 to 5% of the entire global economy. That's between $2 and $5 trillion getting washed through the system every year. And of all of that, less than 1% ever gets seized. Meanwhile, banks spent around $274 billion on compliance in a single year, up nearly a third in just 2 years, and they're still missing it. So why is that? And look, it's not that anyone's lazy. It's that every bank is basically watching its own single security camera. Picture a getaway car driving across a whole city, but each camera only sees one block. The bank flags what it can see on its block, files its report, and moves on. The criminal, though, they deliberately smear the money across lots of banks, in lots of countries, knowing full well that nobody has the full picture. The BIS said it about as plainly as you can. Criminals operate in networks, and they exploit exactly that complexity. So back in 2023, the BIS Innovation Hub's Nordic Center up in Stockholm teamed up with a regtech company out of Iceland called Lucinity, and they set out to test one radical idea. What if you stopped staring at single cameras and started watching the whole city at once? Now here's what makes this story so different from the usual crypto fare. There's no flashy founder, no token, no CEO doing a keynote in a leather jacket. The people behind Aurora are central bankers and public servants. The project was led by Beju Shah, who runs the BIS Innovation Hub's Nordic Center, and the way he framed the challenge really stuck with me. He said money laundering is, in his words, one of the hardest activities to detect in the entire world of financial crime, and that Aurora shows how technology can give us better tools to face it. Above him sits Cecilia Skingsley, who heads the whole BIS Innovation Hub, and in a speech last March, she put the stakes about as bluntly as you can. Over $3 trillion in illicit funds move through the financial system every year, and less than 1% of it is ever intercepted and recovered. On the private side, they brought in Lucinity, whose founder, Gudmundur Kristjansson, has this great mission line. He calls it making money good, plus a network analytics firm called FNA. And I love this part. Just think about who's doing this. The most establishment institution in all of finance, the central banker's own central bank, quietly built an open public interest AI to fight crime, and then published the whole thing for the world to learn from. That is not what you'd expect, right? Okay, this is the part I really geeked out on. Because the obvious worry is, wait, if banks share all our transaction data to train some AI, isn't that a privacy nightmare? And that is exactly the problem Aurora was built to solve. First, the data. They didn't touch a single real customer. They built a completely synthetic world, 155,000 fake people and companies across 6 countries, moving money between 29 different banks over 2 months. And they hid real laundering patterns inside it, mule accounts, Money getting chopped into little pieces and layered around, all the classic tricks. Then they let different models loose on it. The rule-based system, which is basically what banks use today, caught only up to a quarter of the launderers when it worked alone in its silo. But a kind of AI called a graph neural network, and graph here just means it studies the whole web of connections between accounts, not one account at a time. That model caught more than twice as many. And when it could see across borders, it found about 80% of them. The false alarms, by the way, the bane of every compliance team's existence, those dropped by roughly three-quarters once the view went national. But here's the genius bit, the privacy piece. They use what's called privacy-enhancing technology, things like homomorphic encryption and federated learning. In plain English, federated learning lets a whole group of banks train one shared AI without ever handing over their raw data. The data stays home, and only the lessons travel. The BIS put it perfectly. You can train a shared model collaboratively without the need to share raw data. So the banks get to team up against criminals without surveilling each other's customers. Now, to be straight with you, on Aurora's own page, the BIS headlines it as catching up to 3 times more laundering and cutting false alarms by up to 80%, while the detailed report uses the slightly more precise numbers I just gave you. Either way, the lesson is identical. Together beats alone by a lot. Now, I want to be totally honest with you here, because that's the whole point of this channel. And frankly, the BIS is refreshingly honest too. Aurora is a proof of concept. It ran on that synthetic data, not on the live financial system. At least not yet. And it wasn't all smooth sailing. That fancy homomorphic encryption I mentioned, when they tried to run it at full scale, it basically buckled. They threw 70 gigabytes of memory at it and still couldn't get it running cleanly. So they had to pair it with another privacy technique to make it work. And harmonizing the laws across a bunch of different countries, that part is genuinely hard. The BIS itself calls this kind of analytics a valuable supplementary tool, just one piece of the puzzle. No overhyping at all. But, and this is what tells you it wasn't a one-off, just look at the family of projects it kicked off. There's Project Hertha, run by the BIS London Centre together with the Bank of England, and it wrapped up just last year. Hertha took Aurora's ideas and ran them on a simulated real-time payment system. Almost 2 million accounts, hundreds of millions of transactions. And it turned up about 12% more illicit accounts, plus 26% more of the brand new sneaky behaviors the old rules had never even seen. And there's more beyond that. Projects with names like Mandala and Noor, plus a big BIS analytics challenge last year focused entirely on financial crime, which was won by a graph analytics team called Pometry. So Aurora was never an experiment that just got filed away on a shelf. It was the spark. So where does all of this stand right now, in 2026? Here's the freshest part. Aurora is not finished. It's in phase 2. Through the summer of last year, the BIS Nordic Center ran an open call for real-world case studies. And this past October, they gathered experts together in Stockholm for what they called a privacy tech deep dive. And the whole goal this time isn't just to study it, it's to actually deploy it. The BIS even has a phrase for what they're building across all these projects, and I think it's worth remembering. They call it a global financial integrity technology stack. So if you caught our piece on Project Aurora, where these very same folks are rebuilding how money moves across borders, well, Aurora is the other half of that story. It's how they plan to catch the people abusing those rails. And you can already see the idea spreading out into the real world. Over in Europe, a brand new authority just went live last year, the Anti-Money Laundering Authority, based in Frankfurt. And it's built to do exactly what Aurora proved works. Pool the data across borders and analyze it together. Now, to be clear, that's not Aurora getting copy-pasted. It's the same core idea getting institutionalized. And is AI part of the future here? Oh, absolutely. It basically is the future. Beju Shah has been really clear that the next frontier is making these models explainable and trustworthy, so they're not just powerful, but something that regulators all over the world can actually understand and rely on. So let's bring it home. If there's one idea to walk away with, it's this. For years, we just assumed you had to choose between protecting privacy and catching criminals. And Aurora is quietly showing that that's a false choice. With the right technology, banks can fight financial crime together without ever spying on each other's customers. Collaboration beats silos. And here's your action item, because this one's genuinely doable. The BIS published the entire Aurora report for free, and the Hertha report too. I'll drop both links in the description and in the Notion page below. Read even just the summaries, and honestly, you'll understand where the fight against financial crime is heading better than almost anyone in your feed. And the thing to watch this year is simple: whether Phase 2 moves out of the lab and into the real banking system, and whether regulators like that new European authority actually put it to work. That's your signal this is becoming real. If you got something out of this one, do me a favor and subscribe. We go deep on the institutions quietly rebuilding finance, with no hype and no price talk, just the real story. And drop me a comment. Should the world's banks be teaming up like this to catch criminals? I read every single one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.